I'm Duncan Macleod. I'm one of the Presbytery Ministers with the Port Phillip East Presbytery, working alongside Annika Opperval and Craig Mitchell. In a previous life, back in the 1980s, I was working in the horticultural industry in New Zealand, in the Bay of Plenty. My wife, Edison, and I, we lived in Katikati, and a particular part of my work was in the kiwi fruit industry. So I worked in a range of roles, including a general worker on an orchard, and then part of a team that was managing orchards for Queen Street farmers, or Queen Street orchardists, so people who had money to spend on starting up orchards, knowing that for the first 3 or 4 years, the orchard would make a loss and they could write it off in tax. But over time, those orchards had to develop effectiveness and health, and that was part of our role. So here you see the kiwi fruit harvest, and if we had you all here in person, we'd be handing out kiwi fruit to every one of you, so you'd have a sense of tasting this. So the kiwi fruit are harvested hard, but they have the right sugar level that they will ripen when the temperature's right, but they're hard enough that they will stay in cool storage for a year across the world. And most of the kiwi fruit on the orchard I was working on was being exported to Japan and Germany. So you'll see here that this is almost the end of a process, which from here on goes into the packing shed. And I was responsible for quality control in the group I was working with, making sure that we didn't let anything through that we didn't want to end up on tables in Germany or Japan. But it began a lot earlier, and here we have pergolas being set up. It's an orchard in its early stages, with the kiwi fruit just starting off, male and female vines. And here you see a manager of an orchard and probably the owner walking through and getting a sense of what might be going on. And we had a number of people who would come and go. Some people were on staff permanently, but others came on for particular parts of the year. And here we've got a couple of people in the winter pruning section, taking off the dead wood, the fruit, the branches that have borne fruit last year, but they won't next year. So we have to make room for new fruit to grow. So there's a sense in which we're thinking ahead, as well as assessing the health of the vine as we go. Here's someone working to assess the health of a vine through the flowering stage. And it's not just the vine that we have to pay attention to, it's also the health of the honeybees as part of the pollination process, as well as making sure that the whole vineyard is healthy in terms of pests, funguses, and so on. And ensuring that when we spray the orchard, the workers are kept healthy. And I can tell you, it's no fun when you're working in an orchard and the orchardist next door forgot to tell you that he's been spraying fungicide or herbicide or insecticide, and it all comes through the trees and you have to run for it. Anyway, that's part of the health of the whole system that is important. At times, now this is now back into grapevine, more familiar territory for us here in Melbourne. At times you have to step back and have a look at the overall picture and see what's going on. And here's a group of people reflecting on a new vineyard by the look of it, but they're reflecting on what's going on here and how is it all operating. Now, why have I told you this story? Well, I'm telling you this story because what we're seeing here is the health of a whole system, an ecosystem, which is being considered, which is part of the role of a church council, being able to understand the ecosystem of the church, of the congregation. But I'm also telling you this because this is the kind of story or the kind of image that Jesus used often in his stories to talk about the kingdom of God, the way in which God entrusts us as precious sons and daughters, as workers in the vineyard, as people who have been given responsibility. And we also are able to co-labor with Jesus in the vineyard. So there's a sense in which as we take our role as members of a church council or leaders of the process of a church council, we're taking part as followers of Christ, as a community of learning to discover what it means to share responsibility in the kingdom of God. If we think about some of the key words about how we see ourselves working with Christ, in the basis of union, there's a lot of mention of the word reconciliation as well as the word renewal. And if we look at paragraph 3 in the basis of union, we discover that our purpose as the church is to take part in what God is doing in the world, not just in our neck of the woods, but the whole world, the whole cosmos, the whole creation, in fact. And there's a sense of the reconciliation of all things, reconciliation of people. And as congregations, we have the privilege of learning what it means to be a community of reconciliation, a healthy community. Not just reconciliation in the sense that we get along with one another somehow and we learn to love one another, but also renewal. And that's part of what God is doing in the world, is transformation, helping us discover where we're heading, not just perpetuating where we've been, but discovering our future direction. And so the sense of renewal of all things is part of what we're about in our congregations. 3 words that sometimes can be used for church councils' roles. Governance, if you think about a definition in the dictionary, would just say that it's just the way we organize ourselves, a bit like polity. It's the way we ensure that everything's happening. But we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Management is about how we make sure it works. Spiritual leadership is a special part of the role of a church council, and we'll unpack that through this morning as well. So let's think about the church council as a governance body. And here's some of the ways in which we think about governance across the world, across not-for-profit as well as commercial organizations. We have boards who are responsible for vision, direction, for goals, for the health of an organization, addressing any risks and finding ways through those, and ensuring that we have frameworks for accountability. It's a critical role for the church council as we oversee what's happening in the congregation. And that word oversight is critical for us, not overlooking, but overseeing, having a sense of being able to look over the whole picture and ensure that we have things in place that can address the health of the congregation. And when we think about not-for-profit organisations, the government at the moment is very interested, the Victorian government and the federal government, through the Charity Commission and so on, they are very interested in ethical governance because we have often organisations that fall over because their governance wasn't ethical. A critical part of ethical governance is beginning with values. So when you come to make decisions, you know what values are forming your way of operating. We're going to find all kinds of things that come our way that we don't always expect. But if we know who we are and whose we are, if there's a sense of this is the kind of people we need to be, this is the way we operate, these are the values that we expect to be embodied, that's the way to begin. So this morning, I'm going to ask you to reflect on this question. What values would you expect to be embodied in your church council? Now, I know there are some people here who are members of church councils. We have chairs and secretaries and treasurers and other people with roles. And there are some people who are thinking about being on a church council or are thinking about inviting someone else to be on a church council. But the question applies to all of us. What values, what do you see as important to be seen as put into practice in the way we operate on our church council? And I can think of a couple of those. One of those would be the way in which we honor one another. We actually listen to the points of view of each other and respect one another. That's one thing that you would expect to see in a church council or a city council or a board of an organization. Another one would be transparency as opposed to secrecy. There'll be a sense of, even though we hold confidentiality, we would have a sense that we're not a secret organization, that we are able to talk about what we're doing and why we're doing that and be accountable for that. But I'm sure you can think of a few, and I'm going to ask you now in small groups to reflect on this question.